Last time, we made the point that just as our genetics determine how we develop physically, there are spiritual markers in our lives that have a huge influence on the formation of our faith. Essentially, those markers are the significant people who leave an impression on us and the significant events that do the same, even though we may not recognize their significance at the time. Now, if you haven't seen last week's introduction to what I'm calling your spiritual genome, you really need to go back and watch it before this one. It'll help you understand the role of your spiritual markers. In part 1, we looked at the way our faith is shaped by various people. Parents or surrogate parents who filled that role, friends, mentors, teachers, pastors, media influencers like authors and broadcasters, complete strangers or chance encounters, people of other faiths, or people of no faith. Today, we're going to look at significant events that had a significant impact on the evolution of your faith. And as we go along, feel free to add things to the list because there may be things I haven't even thought of. Also, keep in mind that not everything on this list will be of equal weight and value. Some things may have had a huge impact on your life, whereas others may barely register. And that's okay. Now, let's take those one at a time with varying levels of explanation. First, family dynamics. How did people treat each other at home? What was the effect on you and your faith? And what values were instilled by your family? Look for specific incidents that encouraged your faith or suppressed it. Think back to your earliest impressions of God, the Bible, or the church. And where did they come from? School life is another big factor. How did you fit in? What was school's influence on your sense of identity, security, and self-worth? Were you aware of God's presence, or did you feel largely on your own? And how did either of those help mold your spiritual side? Did anything happen that made you reach out to God, or to confirm your suspicion He just wasn't there? What about church experience or the lack of it? In what way did that shape your spiritual thinking? What specific things of value did you learn from your church experience? Or how did the absence of that exposure prepare you for seeking God later? Were there pivotal incidents related to the church that left a deep impression on your heart or a bad taste in your mouth? And how did those things influence your perception of Jesus and God or your commitment to faith? Personal upheaval is another huge consideration, such as moving to a new neighborhood, school, or church. Often, a change in setting has a big impact because it shakes up our lives and exposes us to new influences, some of them good and some not so good. Can you look back and see how one simple change changed everything and had a major impact on your spiritual development? Okay, let's look at dating. In our younger years, our girlfriends and boyfriends can drastically alter our perception of ourselves, making us feel better or worse about our appearance, personality, and priorities. They often challenge some of our previous assumptions, including spiritual ones, and move us closer or further away from faith. What did that look like for you? Next, sports and hobbies. You may be surprised to find these on the list, but lots of people encounter powerful life lessons through these activities, which tend to take up a good chunk of our time. For me, it was running, as I outlined in a recent video. Sports and hobbies tell us something about ourselves. They usually highlight what we're good at and often have a spiritual application because of the values or traits we learn. So, what insights have your interests taught you about God, or life, or you? And is there some way you can use your hobbies to reach out to others with the gospel? The effects of jobs or a career cannot be overlooked. We spend an entire third of our lives working, so work is a big deal. It often has a lot to do with how we see ourselves and our value. It usually reflects our personality and preferences, and it determines who we spend a lot of our time with. Depending on what we do for a living, work can also teach us valuable lessons about human nature, life in general, and relationships. And in a culture that uses work as a measurement to determine how important or successful you are, our jobs have spiritual implications, not just social and financial ones. Sometimes changing jobs helps our faith, and sometimes it hurts our faith. What's your experience? In a related matter, let's talk about talents and skills. Whether it's what we do at work or skills and expertise we've developed in other settings, these things are often one of the ways God prepares us to work in the spiritual realm through the church. So, what are your skills, and how can you use them to bless your brothers and sisters and serve others in the community? If you can't see how they fit into an existing ministry, talk to us about a new one, because we all have a giftedness from God, and we're to put them together for the common good. When we do that, the church is so much stronger. Let me just say that of all the factors we're talking about, this is the one that resonates most with me. I spent 30 years training and working as a news reporter, and everything I learned about writing and communication was directly transferable to my work as a pastor. I never wanted or intended to be a minister, but God had other plans, and He made sure I was equipped and prepared in every way. That does not mean I was always faithful to the calling or that I haven't fallen repeatedly on my face. But I've never doubted that I'm doing the work that God intended me to do. The next major influence is marriage. Whether we have a good marriage experience or a troubled one, or a mix of both, it's an influential relationship. Of course, we learn different lessons at different ages and stages of life, and marriages evolve over the years for better or for worse. But our spouses tend to enhance or hobble our faith, depending on whether they reinforce what we believe or resist it. So be specific about the blessings and challenges and try to identify particular ways your spirituality was affected by married life. Closely related is the birth of children. The arrival of kids and grandkids often has a profound spiritual impact. It's hard not to sense something greater than ourselves when we see the beauty, complexity, and innocence of new life. It makes us think about where we came from, why we're here, and where all this is leading. Most new parents also begin to think seriously about what kind of life they're going to pass on to their kids. So it's no wonder researchers say the birth of children is one of the biggest influences on faith and spirituality. But that window of opportunity doesn't stay open long because things get so busy so fast. In retrospect then, how did you react? An equally significant factor is marital breakdowns or breakups. The disintegration of marriage, including one in which people stay together but essentially lead separate lives, affects different people in different ways, depending on the causes of the collapse and how the fractured relationship is handled. Marital breakdowns or divorce can lead to feelings of relief or release, or guilt, failure, and resentment, or all of those things. Divorce makes people question themselves and their judgment, or their worth. Marital failure of all kinds can draw you closer to God or drive you further from Him. Another mitigating circumstance is trauma, such as accidents, abuse, or chronic health problems. What we undergo and overcome helps define us, including our faith. It usually comes down to whether we try to handle those challenges entirely on our own or invite God to help. Either way, when serious, unforeseen circumstances or long-term challenges shake us to the very foundation, it often leads to soul-searching and questions about who we are, what really matters, and what we want out of life. So often, we drift through life taking everything for granted, we're busy and distracted. But when trauma and turmoil happen, we're forced to stop and evaluate our lives, and that often points people to God. If gratitude doesn't, need often does. Then there are emotional challenges, including anxiety, depression, and loneliness. In a culture where cases of mental illness and social isolation are through the roof, a powerful antidote can be found in a deep and abiding sense of God's presence and the love and acceptance found among His people. Emotional challenges are often the gateway to God, but they can also hold the potential to blind us to His goodness or make us walk away from people of faith who love us and are concerned about us. And if, for example, you found yourself in a church where you were told to just have more faith, put on a plastic smile, and simply suck it up and get on with your life, you know how damaging simplistic religious platitudes can be. What was your experience like? Financial successes or struggles also play a big role in our faith formation. The New Testament recognizes the incredible extent to which money can define us, deflate us, or defeat us. If we're successful, we can easily fall victim to pride and a sense of entitlement that makes us trust our money instead of our master, as Paul warns. But financial struggle is equally dangerous because it can lead to envy, anxiety, and ambition, all of which separate us from God and our proper priorities. As Paul also says, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, and many who crave money have pierced themselves with many sorrows. So, how has money affected your reliance on God, the priorities you've set, and your view of spirituality? One of the most obvious influences is spiritual upheaval, like troubles in the church, a reevaluation of beliefs, or a personal crisis of faith. Whether you're a spiritual rookie or a seasoned veteran, you're bound to be affected by turmoil in the church, whether it's over differing priorities, doctrine, personality clashes, or the moral failure of leaders. All of that can discourage you and stunt your growth, or force you to grow and rely more on God instead of putting others on a pedestal. Or maybe you've grown and found yourself no longer able to support the teachings of a particular church, forcing you to move on from people who've been a crucial part of your life for decades. Or perhaps you've experienced the dark night of the soul, where something or someone has challenged your beliefs so profoundly you lost your faith, at least temporarily. Maybe you bounce back from that stronger than ever. Or maybe you just haven't been the same since. And also consider grief and loss. They too can be a double-edged sword, forcing us to reach out to God to fill the painful void left by the death of someone we love, or hardening us into thinking that life isn't fair, so God isn't either. Bereavement should make us look at the big picture, with questions like, why are we here? What does God want from us? And what happens next? The conclusions we reach on those issues shape our spirituality. At the very least, death reminds us that nothing lasts forever, and we're not taking anything with us. That will either empower us or paralyze us. So, has the passing of your loved ones strengthened or stunted your faith? Next is retirement. For many people, work is much more than just making a living. It gives us some of our identity, our purpose, and our sense of worth. So when the job is gone, so is all that stuff, and that can be traumatic or at least unsettling. It's a cautionary tale that reminds us to build our self-image and security on God, and to focus on who we are and not on what we do. But it's hard to break a lifetime habit. The key is to rechannel the time and energy we used to put into work, into something meaningful and spiritual. By retirement age, we all have a set of skills and experiences we can use to bless other people, support the church, and write a new chapter that puts to good use all the things God has shown and given us. If you're retired or thinking forward to retirement, how is your faith being shaped by your focus and how you see yourself? And last, there's substantial influence on our spirituality when it comes to facing our own death. As we get older or face a serious illness, it's natural to confront our own mortality and start thinking deeply, perhaps for the first time, about our last days, our legacy, and what comes next. Those considerations often encourage people to embrace God and eternity. But it's not true that getting old or sick automatically makes people more spiritual. Like everything else in life, it all depends on how we see things. The bottom line is, if Jesus came back from the dead, we will too. And if you really believe that, it should determine how you live and how you die. So how does your sense of mortality color your faith? Well, there you have it. Those are the events or stages that typically have the most to do with how your faith turns out. But as you get ready to do your detailed genome, do a little analysis along the way. Can you see examples of God's providence in your life? Things you thought were random or meaningless, but turned out to be spiritually significant? Can you see times where God used success or adversity to prepare, teach, and mature you? Or does your past suggest what you should be doing today to use your spirituality? If, for example, you can identify something you've always enjoyed and been good at, is there some way you could use that in the church or the community? Also, what are the most important lessons you've learned about your own spirituality? Who in your life specifically can you pass on those lessons to? And last, what spiritual needs do you have right now, and how can we at Followers help? Keep in mind that you'll only get out of this exercise as much as you're willing to put into it. So if you're really not going to give some serious thought and prayer to this, maybe you should just tuck it away until you're ready. But if you are going to give it an honest shot, don't just focus on the big and bold developments, because it's often the small things that have the greatest impact. And nobody knows that better than I do. When I was 15, I saw a small ad in the local newspaper for a Bible correspondence course. Even though nobody in my family was going to church at the time, I was interested in the Bible and signed up. For the next several weeks, these arrived in the mail, one at a time. I read through each booklet, filled in the quiz on the back page, and mailed in that sheet before getting the next lesson. When I completed the 8th and final lesson, a local minister showed up at my house with a fancy certificate, because the course was just an outreach tool to find people who might be interested in studying the Bible further. That man's name was Tom Blake, and he was a pivotal influence in my life. He set up a Bible study with me, my mother Alice, my Aunt Rose, and my younger brother Jim. And after a series of weeks, we made a full commitment to Christ and were baptized. The following Sunday, I walked into Tom's small church and saw a redhead. I distinctly remember my first thoughts were, "She's got beautiful hair and great legs." Well, in the ensuing years, I began to lead communion, teach Sunday school, and preach. And then I went away to Carleton University to study journalism. The year I got back, I married that redhead because I never found anyone who came anywhere close to Susan and who she was. I also took on ministerial duties because we were in between pastors. And I've really come to see in a powerful way that unless and until we get our concept of God the way it's supposed to be, everything else gets way out of whack. After a series of pastors, I was back doing that work and holding down a full-time job in television. In February 1997, the church split and Followers was born. Just 1 month later, I got laid off at CTV, leaving me available to help guide the new congregation full-time. So, 4 conversions, a 45-year marriage, decades of spiritual training, and a new church, all because of a tiny ad in the newspaper. It changed the course of my entire life, and not just mine. In fact, you likely wouldn't be at Followers or be watching this video were it not for the fact that a nerdy 15-year-old was influenced by the faith of his mother and grandmother and answered a Bible ad. So hopefully you now know what to look for when it comes to mapping your spiritual genome. Each one of us has a unique one, which makes us who we are from a faith point of view. Get to understand yours, and you'll have a much fuller appreciation of just how much God has been working in your life all along. And that should give you even more confidence He'll continue to do so. Respond to that spiritual blueprint, and you'll be the spitting image of the one who created you.